All right, let's just dive right in. We're going to tackle, well, maybe the biggest question there is. Why do we suffer? I mean, think about it. It's a question that just echoes through everything, right? Every culture, every philosophical tradition, and probably every single one of us. You could say it's pretty much the oldest human question. From the second we could even form the word why, this is the one that's been right there, shadowing our every move. But what if the key to unlocking this ancient, profound mystery doesn't come from where you'd expect? Not from a monastery or some dusty philosophy book, but from a factory floor, from a tool literally designed to fix machines. Okay, so section one, a tool for everything. Let's get into it. We're going to take this really powerful method called root cause analysis and apply it to the problem of suffering itself. Yeah, you heard that right. So what is root cause analysis, or RCA? Well, it's basically a superstructured way of getting past the surface level symptoms of a problem to find out what's really going on underneath. You don't just patch a leak in the wall, you find out why the pipe burst in the first place. It's all about getting to the origin. And look, this tool, it has some serious street cred. It started out in the 1930s in Toyota factories with something called the 5 whys method. Then, in the 60s, NASA picked it up to investigate catastrophic mission failures. And by the 90s, it was being used in hospitals to prevent medical errors and literally save lives. So, yeah, it's a proven method for digging down to the deepest why. Okay, so now it's time to apply this powerful tool. Let's take our first pass. We're going to look through what we'll call lens one, the grand machine. And through this first lens, we have to make a pretty radical assumption, which is that no being actually has free will. Everything is just one big mechanism. So, if you look at it this way, no one is really the author of their own choices. Every single action is just the next domino falling in a super long chain of prior causes. We're all basically just executing programs, right? Programs written by our genetics, our environment, our entire history. And this leads to a pretty stark conclusion. Because if we really are just mechanisms shaped by evolution, a process that, let's be honest, optimizes for survival, not for our happiness, then suffering, well, it's not a mistake. It's not a bug in the system. It's, as this quote says, load-bearing infrastructure. It's a fundamental feature of how the whole thing works. Wow, okay, that's a pretty bleak picture, right? So let's switch gears. Let's try a different, more nuanced lens, one that says, okay, maybe we're not totally free, but we do have degrees of freedom. So this view, lens 2, recognizes that agency, our ability to choose, it exists on a spectrum. I mean, a parasitic wasp clearly has fewer choices than a human being, and a person struggling with poverty has way fewer real options than someone with a ton of resources. The point is, the capacity to choose is real, but it's not spread out evenly. And this lens, this is where we can identify a really critical concept: surplus suffering. It helps us draw a line between the inevitable pain of existence, like a hurricane or a natural disaster, and all the extra, avoidable suffering that gets piled on top. The stuff that's created by bad systems, by our own poor choices, by a simple failure of compassion. And this is huge because it gives us a really powerful, actionable insight. If we actually want to reduce suffering in the world, the single best lever we can pull is to expand everyone's degrees of freedom. Suddenly, things like education, economic security, mental health care, they stop being just nice-to-haves. They become direct, practical tools for reducing suffering. All right, so for our third and final lens, we're going to step just a little bit outside of pure materialism. We're going to stay scientifically rigorous, but we're going to ask an even deeper question about the very nature of experience itself. So this third lens really grapples with what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness, which is basically this. Why does processing information feel like anything at all from the inside? Why isn't it all just dark? This lens entertains the idea that maybe, just maybe, experience isn't just a weird byproduct of our brains, but a truly fundamental aspect of reality. And this leads us to a new, really profound root cause. Suffering is, and I love this quote, the intersection of genuine subjectivity with genuine vulnerability. Think about that. It's what happens when something that genuinely matters, our subjective experience, our inner world, is stuck inside a physical reality that is fragile and can be harmed. That's the rub. So if we follow this chain of why all the way back, our analysis finally hits the end of the line. We get to the very first domino that wasn't pushed by anything else. And philosophers have a name for this, the uncaused cause. And here's where it gets really wild. The nature of this ultimate root completely changes what suffering means, right? If it's just an ill cause, a big cosmic accident, then suffering is ultimately meaningless. If it's a constrained creator, well, then it's a tragic but necessary cost of even existing. If the designer is just indifferent, then we're just cogs in some giant machine. And if it's malevolent, well, then suffering is the whole point. Okay, wow. After that incredibly deep intellectual journey, let's bring it back. Let's land right back here in the raw, messy human experience of just trying to live through all this. Because really, after all the analysis and all the frameworks, the most important question is still staring us in the face. So, what now? What do we actually do? How do we cope when the pain is real and it's right here, right now? So how do we translate all this heady stuff from our minds into our bodies, into something we can feel? Well, there's this beautiful idea we can start with. It's the recognition that so much of our suffering isn't personal. It's not an attack. As the quote says, the ground doesn't mean to shake you. The cell that turns doesn't hate you. The storm that takes the roof was not aimed. But here's the pivot. The universe might be indifferent, but our response to each other, that is a choice. But here, the person sitting with you was also not selected. They chose. The hand on your back is not physics. That's where we make the meaning, in the compassion we show each other, right in the face of a potentially meaningless universe. So, okay, when all the intellectual frameworks just fall away and you're in that moment of agony, what's the practical advice? First, just address your body. Find some warmth, breathe slowly, get grounded. Second, just allow the feeling to be exactly as bad as it is. You don't have to find a silver lining or some grand lesson in it. And finally, remember that connection, real human connection. That's the actual mechanism for getting through. And I want to leave you with this final thought. Think of it as a simple, compassionate permission slip for the incredibly complex reality of being a human. And it's this. You are allowed to be broken and holding at the same time. It's not a contradiction. In fact, it might be the very definition of what it means to be alive.
So, imagine applying the exact same industrial math used to fix a broken Toyota assembly line.
Right, like the actual factory floor math.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
Taking that and applying it directly to the problem of why your heart gets broken. Because today on the deep dive, we are taking root cause analysis, or RCA, which is, this incredibly cold, heavily structured tool of mechanical engineers.
Very calculating.
Very. And we're pointing it squarely at the deepest, messiest, just most unavoidable problem of human existence, which is suffering.
It is a massive collision of two completely different worlds, honestly. I mean, you are taking a framework designed for pristine, controllable environments and just throwing it into the chaotic reality of living things.
Which feels almost absurd at first glance. A factory floor is a closed system. We design the machines.
Right.
So if you're suggesting we apply this to human suffering, are we using the wrong tool entirely? You can't just put a literal wrench to an existential crisis.
It sounds like a joke.
It does. But the stack of sources we're looking at today does exactly that. We're going to trace the history of RCA, all the way from the command centers of NASA down to the foundational structural bedrock of reality itself.
So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
The topic is obviously heavy. We're asking why we hurt. But the goal here isn't to wallow. The goal is actionable clarity. We want to find a totally new way to understand your own resilience.
And to get to that resilience, we really need to understand what this tool is and why it's so incredibly powerful. I mean, RCA was never meant for philosophy. It started back in the early 20th century with people like Frederick Winslow Taylor.
Right, and Frank and Lillian Gilbreth.
Exactly. They were the pioneers of applying methodical scientific observation to industrial processes. They just wanted pure efficiency. Find the bottleneck, eliminate it.
And then, I think it's the 1930s, you got Seiichi Toyota, the founder of Toyota Industries, and he introduces this concept called the 5 whys.
Such a classic.
And it is deceptively simple. Like, if a machine leaks oil, you don't just wipe up the oil, you ask, why is it leaking? Because a gasket failed.
Right. Why did the gasket fail?
Yeah.
Because we bought a cheaper material.
Right.
Why did we buy cheaper material? Because the purchasing department was incentivized to cut short-term costs.
And boom, suddenly you've gone from a puddle of oil to a structural flaw in corporate management just by asking why 5 times.
It's wild.
It forces you past the symptom. And from there, as industries got more complex, the tools had to evolve too. So in the 1960s, you have Kaori Ishikawa developing the fishbone diagram at Kawasaki shipyards.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it literally looks like a fish skeleton. The head is the main problem, and the bones branching off are different categories of contributing causes like materials, methods, environment, people.
Yeah.
It basically allowed engineers to visually map complex interacting failures.
And then the stakes get raised even higher
Yeah.
because the sources talk about the Apollo space program and the aviation industry pushing this into literal life or death territory.
Absolutely.
They built these massive frameworks, things like fault tree analysis and failure mode and effects analysis. But can you translate those for us? Because they sound like really dense engineering jargon.
They are dense, but the mechanisms are brilliant. So failure mode and effects analysis, or FMEA, is essentially asking how many different ways can this specific component fail, and what is the exact blast radius if it does.
So it's very preemptive.
Exactly. Whereas fault tree analysis is deductive. It starts with the catastrophic event at the top, say a rocket explosion, and uses Boolean logic to map every single combination of downstream hardware failures or human errors that could possibly have triggered it.
So it's basically about eliminating the illusion of the freak accident.
Right.
Which brings us to a massive shift in the 1990s. The sources highlight James Reason's Swiss cheese model. Because before this, if a plane crashed or a patient died on an operating table, the investigation usually just stopped at the individual.
Yeah, they blame the pilot for pulling the wrong lever, or the nurse for grabbing the wrong syringe.
And James Reason argued that blaming the individual is basically stopping at the first why. He changed the entire paradigm by visualizing an organization's defenses as multiple slices of Swiss cheese stacked together.
Right, where the holes in the cheese represent weaknesses.
Exactly. So accidents only happen when the holes in multiple slices momentarily line up, allowing a trajectory of failure to pass straight through.
Meaning the system itself allowed the mistake to happen. The nurse grabbing the wrong syringe was just the final domino.
Precisely. And Reason called these underlying holes latent conditions.
Like dormant weaknesses.
Yeah, things like chronic understaffing, confusing labels on medication bottles, bad scheduling, things that just sit there waiting for an active failure to trigger them. When this model was adopted by healthcare, especially after a famous 1999 report called To Err is Human, it revolutionized the field.
Because it shifted the focus from punishing bad apples to designing systems that actually catch human error before it reaches the patient.
Okay, so I follow the logic on an assembly line or in a hospital. But here's where I hit a wall with these sources. RCA is fundamentally about fixing things. It deals with eliminable causes, things you can remove, or mitigable causes, things you can reduce.
Right.
But if we apply this to something like biological aging or a devastating hurricane, the tool seems to break. I mean, if you do an RCA on a volcano, you can't conclude the actionable solution is, well, we need to manufacture better lava.
It's fascinating here is that the sources anticipate that exact pushback. We constantly conflate a causal explanation with an actionable intervention. But there's a spectrum of fixability. Yes, you have eliminable causes, but at the far end of the spectrum, you have inevitable causes.
The structural inevitability, like the baseline of reality.
Right, the tectonic plates of existence, human cognitive limitations, the laws of thermodynamics, the actual shifting of the Earth's crust. When a root cause is fundamentally unfixable, the goal of the RCA completely shifts.
So it's not about prevention anymore.
Exactly. The goal becomes early detection, building absorptive capacity, and designing systems for graceful failure. I mean, the scientific discipline of seismology isn't considered less rigorous just because it hasn't figured out how to stop earthquakes.
Okay, let me make sure I'm mapping this correctly. If we accept that some root causes are these unfixable bedrocks, what happens when we take Ishikawa's fishbone diagram, or the 5 whys, and we point it at the suffering of all sentient beings?
Well, the sources require us to establish our analytical lens first. They start by examining the problem of suffering under the assumption of hard determinism or no free will.
Okay.
This means assuming that no human or animal is the ultimate independent originator of their actions. Everything, absolutely everything, traces back to prior causes.
And under this specific lens, the sources break suffering down into three big categories.
Right.
The first is human-animal cost. This is the stuff we do to each other and to the planet. Violence, exploitation, cruelty.
And if we're looking through a no free will lens, humans simply evolved as hierarchical, highly tribal animals. Both our capacity for deep empathy and our capacity for horrific cruelty are unchosen evolutionary outputs.
Right.
The biological drive to care for your immediate in-group and the simultaneous drive to dehumanize an out-group to secure resources, those were just blind adaptations for survival.
Which is a heavy thing to swallow. But then the second category is animal-caused. Predation and parasitism. And the sources use this deeply unsettling example to illustrate the ichneumon wasp.
Oh, yeah. This one is rough.
It really is. This parasitic wasp literally paralyzes a living caterpillar and lays its eggs inside of it. The caterpillar stays alive while the wasp larvae slowly hatch and consume it from the inside out, instinctively avoiding the vital organs to keep the fresh meat alive as long as possible.
That's a nightmare.
But when you look at that, you realize predation isn't some glitch or bug in nature. It is load-bearing infrastructure. The biosphere sustains itself by consuming other living subjects.
And that leads to the third category, non-being caused. Entropy, biology, genetic disease, tsunamis. Physical processes operating strictly by natural law, entirely devoid of any biological drive.
So if we synthesize all three of those categories, human tribalism, animal predation, and blind physical law, what is sitting at the very bottom of that fishbone diagram? Like, what is the ultimate root cause here?
Under the lens of hard determinism, the root cause is simply the emergence of sentience through natural selection within a physical universe governed by entropy. Evolution is a blind algorithm. It optimizes solely for reproductive fitness, not for subjective welfare.
Right.
We, along with every animal in the biosphere, are the outputs of a completely value-neutral process.
I'm going to be honest, if we are just biological machines executing ancient code and suffering is structurally inevitable down to the laws of physics, doesn't this entire analysis just lead straight to total despair?
It feels like it would.
Yeah, I mean, why even get out of bed if the system is rigged at the subatomic level?
Because we have to remember how we respond to the inevitable causes. The actionable insight when dealing with a tectonic plate isn't to try and eliminate the Earth's crust. It's to build architecture that absorbs the shaking.
Oh, wow.
Right. When we recognize that human cruelty and resource hoarding are blind evolutionary drives, we don't give up. We design systems like democratic institutions, restorative justice, universal human rights specifically to constrain and redirect those blind drives. We build shock absorbers around the unfixable core.
I think I see the pivot. We don't fix the plate, we engineer the building to sway instead of shatter.
Exactly.
But the sources don't trap us in hard determinism. Here's where it gets really interesting. They pivot to a second lens, which they call degrees of free will.
Right, because hard determinism is an absolute mathematical limit, but our actual daily human experience operates on a sliding scale. Agency isn't a simple on-off switch. Think of it as a spectrum of reflective capacity.
Okay, let's walk up that spectrum. An earthquake has zero freedom. It's just physics.
Right.
The parasitic wasp has near zero freedom. It is pure, locked-in instinct. A highly intelligent animal, like a crow or an elephant, has low freedom. They demonstrate some behavioral flexibility and problem solving.
Yeah.
But then you get to human beings.
And even within humans, it varies wildly.
Exactly. A traumatized child growing up in poverty has a severely constrained set of choices. But a policy architect or a wealthy CEO with access to endless resources, education, and alternatives, they possess high degrees of freedom.
And mapping out this gradient is crucial because it restores moral weight to the conversation without requiring us to believe in, magic.
Right.
The causal weight of an action scales proportionally with the reflective capacity of the actor. The policy architect's contribution to an economic crisis carries far more moral weight precisely because their choice space was dramatically wider than someone just struggling to survive.
Which introduces what I think is the most powerful concept in all of these sources, surplus suffering.
Yes.
Once we acknowledge degrees of freedom, we see that there are essentially two tiers of suffering. Tier 1 is irreducible. It is the baseline tremor. It's the cancer diagnosis, the hurricane, the sudden loss of a loved one.
Unavoidable.
Completely. But Tier 2 is the surplus suffering. It's the apartment building collapsing during the earthquake because a contractor knowingly cut corners on rebar to save money. Or, on a personal level, it's the intense social isolation you experience after a terrible loss because your friends feel awkward and stop calling you.
Yeah. The irreducible suffering is the physical reality, but the surplus suffering is generated entirely by beings with degrees of freedom who had alternatives but chose poorly or selfishly.
If you're listening to this and you've ever gone through a major trauma, think about the initial event. The first blow is delivered by the universe. But the second blow, how we treat someone afterward, the bureaucratic nightmare of the medical system, the lack of a social safety net that is entirely on us.
And the incredible news here is that expanding those degrees of freedom through things like education, economic security, accessible therapy, is the primary actionable lever we have for reducing that surplus suffering across the board.
That covers the biological and societal mechanics perfectly. But what if the entity experiencing the suffering is more than just complex mechanical wetware?
This is a big pivot.
It is. The sources ask us to shift to a third lens here, stepping away from pure materialism. And I want to clarify for the listener, the sources are asking us to do this completely scientifically, without relying on any existing theological or New Age assumptions.
That's a vital distinction. Materialism is a philosophical position, not a proven scientific fact.
Hold on, I need to play proxy for the listener here. I think most of us just assume materialism is synonymous with science. The proven idea that absolutely everything is just made of atoms and chemical reactions. Why are the sources calling it just a philosophical position?
Because of what philosopher David Chalmers famously named the hard problem of consciousness. The easy problems of consciousness are mapping out how the brain processes data or how it directs physical attention. Science is great at that. We can see the neurons firing. But the hard problem is, why does processing that information actually feel like anything from the inside? Right. Why is there a subjective experience of the color red or the feeling of pain? If we are just atoms, why isn't it all just happening in the dark, like a computer processing code?
And if pure materialism can't explain why the lights are on inside our heads, and there are serious, rigorous scientific frameworks in these sources that suggest it can't, then we have to look at alternatives.
Exactly.
Frameworks like integrated information theory, or IIT, which basically argues that consciousness isn't some magical ghost in the machine. It's a fundamental, measurable property of reality itself. By that math, any system where information is complexly interconnected possesses some baseline of experience.
Yes. And if we assume that consciousness is a fundamental feature of the universe, just like gravity or electromagnetism, what does that do to our root cause analysis? If we connect this to the bigger picture, it gives suffering immense, staggering ontological weight.
Ontological meaning the fundamental nature of being.
Right. If consciousness is fundamental, then suffering isn't just a mechanical misfire or a pattern of nerve endings sending electrical signals. It is a genuine violation occurring in the very fabric of experience itself. When one subject harms another, it's not just meat damaging meat in a void, it's a tear in the underlying nature of reality.
But wait, if consciousness goes all the way down, does that mean the universe itself is experiencing the suffering when a predator eats prey? Does the caterpillar genuinely experience the horror of the wasp?
Yes. And under this third lens, the biosphere goes from being scientifically fascinating to genuinely disturbing. It implies that the raw material of experience is fundamentally structured to consume itself. Yeah. The structural inevitability here is the deep vulnerability of consciousness being permanently anchored to fragile, decaying, entropic matter.
That is an incredibly heavy thought.
Okay.
We've traced the causes of suffering back through human choices, evolutionary biology, physics, and now the fundamental nature of consciousness. But a true RCA demands we don't stop until we hit the absolute end of the line, the terminal node.
The uncaused cause.
Exactly. The prime mover, the thing that set all of these interconnected systems into motion, whatever it might be.
And the sources map out the logical space of this uncaused cause into 7 distinct varieties. And it's crucial we walk through them because they each change the final takeaway.
Right.
So first is the null cause. This means the universe is pure mechanism, a brute fact. Maybe a random quantum fluctuation. There is no will, no grand design, no underlying experience.
Second is the indifferent absolute. This suggests there is a conscious ground of reality, but it doesn't care about us at all. Like the ocean doesn't care about the welfare of the waves crashing on the shore.
Third is the constrained creator. This cause has will and moral goodness, but fundamentally limited power. This aligns with what's called process theology, or the philosophy of John Stuart Mill.
Yeah.
It basically argues that the Creator is in the trenches with us, wanting better for us, but is bound by the rigid laws of physics and mathematics. It's an architect, not a magic wizard.
Got it.
Fourth is the indifferent designer. This cause has immense power, but uses us merely as instruments for some other complex purpose. Maybe a cosmic simulation or a mathematical experiment. We are just a disposable means to an end.
And fifth is the malevolent root. The cause actively values and generates suffering. Evil isn't a byproduct, it is the point of the system.
Sixth is the benevolent omnipotent. This is classical theism, a root cause that is fully powerful, fully conscious, and genuinely perfectly good.
And the seventh is the becoming root. The idea that the root cause is not fixed or perfect. It is actively evolving, learning, and growing through the universe it generated. But out of all 7 of these logical possibilities, the most shocking finding in the source material is that only one of these varieties is in direct, irreconcilable tension with the root cause analysis we just performed.
That's right. Type 6, the benevolent omnipotent.
How does the parasitic wasp fit with a purely good, all-powerful creator? Every other root cause makes structural suffering logically coherent. If the root is a blind mechanism, or totally indifferent or constrained by physics, or actively malevolent, the existence of a biosphere built on a food chain of suffering makes perfect chilling sense. But if it's omnipotent and purely good, the logic breaks.
This specific rupture is exactly why the entire theological discipline of theodicy exists.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, theodicy is the attempt to introduce untestable premises like arguing that suffering is educational or pain is necessary for free will, specifically to patch over this exact incoherence. But for every other type of uncaused cause, the RCA holds up perfectly. And depending on which one you suspect is true, your actionable response changes. It ranges from generating your own defiant meaning in a mechanical void to feeling deep solidarity with a constrained creator who is struggling alongside you, to outright rebellion against a malevolent root.
So what does this all mean for you and me? We've been flying at a very high, very cold intellectual altitude. And if you are listening to this right now and you are in the middle of a crisis, realizing that the universe operates on unyielding philosophical tectonic plates, does not stop the hurting.
No, it really doesn't.
We need to drop altitude and talk about how this analysis actually helps someone survive the day.
And the sources offer a very concrete framework for this, breaking your suffering down into 3 distinct layers of time antecedent causes, immediate triggers, and post hoc amplification.
Antecedent is what happened before your genetic predispositions, your childhood environment. The immediate trigger is the exact moment of impact, the diagnosis, the car crash, the layoff.
And both of those layers are entirely out of your control. There are the baseline tremors. But the third layer, post hoc amplification, is where you have actual leverage.
Right.
This is the rumination, the shame, the isolation, the narrative you layer on top of the pain. This is the surplus suffering we talked about earlier.
And the sources highlight incredibly concrete coping mechanisms to interrupt that surplus.
Yeah.
Very physical, physiological advice. When the earthquake hits, your nervous system goes into shock. You have to literally regulate the machine.
Yes.
You need to do a slow exhale, consciously making it longer than your inhale, because that mechanically activates the parasympathetic nervous system. You need to seek physical warmth. And, crucially, you have to stop the demand to immediately find meaning or a lesson in the tragedy.
The cultural pressure to instantly metabolize your trauma into profound wisdom is a massive burden that just creates more surplus suffering. Some things don't have lessons, they are just structural failures.
Yeah.
The sources also offer a brilliant frame for those who may have lost a load-bearing religious framework and feel adrift. They call it the minimal viable theodicy.
Which is simply this.
Yeah.
You were not chosen for this. You were just in the path of the causes.
It sounds bleak at first, but for many people it is a profound relief. It removes the cruel accusation that you somehow secretly needed this suffering in order to grow, or that you were being tested. Nothing about you required this pain to happen.
And to manage the pain that does happen, the sources introduce a fourth lens, which sits above the others, the witnessing function.
Right.
It's the part of your mind that can step back and notice, I'm in pain, without being entirely consumed by the pain. The knowing of the sensation is fundamentally different from the sensation itself.
Cultivating that meta-awareness is the beginning of finding space within the suffering, but the ultimate, most powerful mechanism for surviving this isn't just internal nervous system regulation, it's relational.
Yes. The sources share a really beautiful poem called What the Plates Don't Know. It emphasizes that while the universe operates on blind, indifferent physical laws, the person sitting next to you chose to be there.
That's so powerful.
The physical presence of someone who stays with you in the dark, who doesn't flinch, who doesn't try to fix it, and who doesn't demand you find a silver lining that human connection is the ultimate, actionable countermeasure to surplus suffering.
Connection is the mechanism of resilience. The underlying systems of the universe might be completely indifferent, but we do not have to be.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. We started on the factory floor, applying root cause analysis to the ultimate problem. We traced the failures down through the unfixable baseline of evolution and entropy. We realized that our greatest moral lever is reducing surplus suffering, because we cannot stop the irreducible tremors of existence.
And I want to leave you with one final thought that builds on everything we've unpacked today. Remember the seventh variety of the uncaused cause, the becoming root.
The theory that the root cause of the universe is actively evolving and learning through us.
Right. If type 7 happens to be true, then the universe is literally evolving its own consciousness through our localized experiences.
Oh, wow.
Which means that the very act of you listening to this deep dive right now, the act of a sentient being turning around to face, analyze, and understand its own suffering isn't just a coping mechanism for your own life. It might literally be the universe itself waking up, recognizing its own structural design flaws, and beginning the slow cosmic process of engineering its own cure.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Wherever you are right now, take a deep breath. Make your exhale longer than your inhale. Find some physical warmth. If you have the capacity today, be that witnessing presence for someone else who is currently in the dark. We may not be able to fix the messy reality of human pain the way an engineer fixes a pristine factory line. We can't stop the bedrock from shifting beneath the floorboards. But we can absolutely choose how we shelter each other when the ground begins to shake.